Argentina's president-elect Javier Milei is visiting Washington, D.C. for talks with U.S. government officials and the IMF. A spokesperson for Milei says the talks are aimed first and foremost at explaining his economic plans. Milei was elected on a platform of radical measures that he says will drag Argentina out of its decades-long economic slump. His proposals include shutting down Argentina's central bank and turning away from doing business with China and Brazil, currently Argentina's two biggest trading partners. He also campaigned to replace Argentina's currency, the peso, with the U.S. dollar. We can now speak to Jimena Blanco. She's research director and chief analyst at the risk intelligence company Verisk Maplecroft. Jimena, welcome back to DW. Milei hasn't taken the oath of office yet. He's still only president-elect. So why did he make this trip now?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. The first one is a personal one. He went on let's call it a pilgrimage to thank a very famous rabbi that, he had asked for wisdom in this campaign and to win the campaign. And so the first stop in New York was of a more personal nature than one related to formal office. Now, of course, his second stop in Washington, D.C. is very much related to trying to resolve Argentina's macroeconomic problems. Of course, having that first encounter with the Biden administration, let's not forget that being a president-elect with a very short political career means that he's not a very well-known figure in Washington. So this will give him that first opportunity. And then, of course, the International Monetary Fund that Argentina needs to renegotiate its debt with.
Now, he's not a well-known figure in the U.S. He has been widely compared to Donald Trump, though, by the people who know who he is, who are aware of him. Is that how he's seen in the U.S. as well?
Well, in part, that is very correct. And in fact, Milei does not hide the fact that he admires Donald Trump, that he's got a personal relationship with him, as well as with former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. But there are also some significant differences between Milei and former President Trump. The first one is quite obvious in terms of the size of their political parties, one being, one of the most established and long-living parties in any democracy, the Republican Party in the U.S., whereas Milei's party is just barely 2 years old. But there's also a major difference in terms of, how Milei is looking to reinsert Argentina into global markets, to open up the economy, which you can contrast in some ways to a more, let's say, isolationist approach under the Trump administration, though, of course, as you mentioned earlier, both having quite, strong rhetoric in relation to China.
And he ran on a platform to radically overhaul Argentina's financial system, dollarizing the economy, closing the central bank. But only a week after the election, those plans look like they have already come off track. What happened there?
Well, we always say in political science, there's a huge gap between the campaign trail and sitting in office, right? And so I think reality is hitting home. He's going for a much more pragmatic economic plan. It does not mean that his dollarization program is buried for good, but rather that he needs to get the house in order before he can move with any of his more radical plans. So I think it would be fair to say that he's going for reform right now, not necessarily revolution.
Let's talk about the relationship between Argentina and the International Monetary Fund for a second, because Buenos Aires has provided the IMF with some of the biggest headaches since the agency's inception. The IMF is one of Milei's stops on this trip. Does he have what it takes for a reset?
Well, he has to try that reset. For one, it's no longer that the IMF is Argentina's problem as its biggest debtor. Argentina is also a problem for the IMF. So I think there's two interested parties to sit at the table, look at some of the key economic proposals that Milei plans to send to Congress after he gets inaugurated on the 10th of December. And so what they will be evaluating is, first of all, fiscal retrenchment. Can Argentina stop spending more than it generates? Can it start getting its accounts back on the black from the red? And at what pace can it do that? Because, of course, Argentina has payments due to the IMF in December and January. And there are questions about whether the reserves that the country has are enough to meet those debt servicing commitments. So, of course, renegotiating, getting Argentina back on a more sustainable program will be top of the agenda.
It might be a lot to ask. We're off air in a minute. Maybe briefly, if you can, what would a more realpolitik-based approach in Argentina mean for the region?
Well, of course, it would be interesting to see Argentina began the region's return to the left 4 years ago, and it now seems to be bringing potentially the region back towards the right or a more centrist approach. The question that we need to answer actually is, will that make the economic and social difference that Latin Americans are asking for across the region and not only in Argentina? We'll have to wait and see.
Ximena Blanco of Veris Maple Croft, always great speaking to you. Thank you so much.